One thing that I learned as a parent, as I was growing in my understanding about communication,
Hmm.
there's something that happens to us when we experience a lot of stress. Our
Hmm.
body physically produces that stress hormone, cortisol, and it floods our brain, literally.
Hmm.
And it's referred to by John Gottman as flooding. So when our brains are flooded with that stress hormone, that's when the reaction that you see from flooding is usually fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Those are um, survival mechanisms
Hmm.
that God has put in our minds when we are flooded with extreme stress. And that component became really, really important for us to understand when it came to communicating with our children.
So how do you deal with that though?
Well, you recognize it. That's the first thing. Recognize when you are flooded or when your child is flooded. And really, that's what we called it in our home
Hmm.
is flooding. So the first step is to end the discussion. You recognize it and end the discussion. Why? Why? Well, because it's proven that our brains need at least 20 to 30 minutes to drain. We've got to drain our brains of this stress hormone that has flooded us and creating that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. And so we start with recognizing it. We then stop the conversation. And then we just decide to take a break.
Hmm.
Decide to take a break. Usually apart from each other, because I don't know about you, but most of the time, even if we're saying we're taking a break, it's really hard to stop talking. And so I think being in a car is a difficult circumstance to navigate flooding. But when you're in a home, it's actually great to go into another room.
Hmm.
And there are so many ways to actually help soothe and comfort ourselves or others. And those will be available as an additional resource in the training that's provided on the website. But really, we just have to understand that this is happening
Hmm.
and we need to get navigated.
So what's an example of flooding that we saw in our own kids?
I know with one of our sons, we had entered into a discussion. We were just discussing something that was intense. I know that he was starting to feel more and more stressed about the discussion. But what we noticed was he got this really blank look on his face. And then he started expressing himself in a way that was very contrary to his character.
Hmm.
Honestly, he started lying. He was a teenager, and he started lying about why he did certain things. He was making up things. And this is not something we've seen. This is not a pattern or a sin habit that he had regularly. It was is very out of character. And I had realized that he had flooded and he was doing anything to get out of the conversation. He was trying to flee. That fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. He was trying to flight out of that conversation. So he was really just desperately trying to tell us anything that would make us stop talking
Hmm.
because he had flooded. And so when I understood that this happens, it's so much easier to push the pause button, to give a chance for everybody to kind of recalibrate, to soothe ourselves to a point where we can have productive conversations versus reactive conversations. So flooding is really important with our children, but it's really important even in our marriages,
Hmm.
in all of those relationships with our friends, family. We have to understand everybody floods. And once we understood that,
Hmm.
then we actually came up with like a code word, for even other people in our lives. I remember my niece and nephew, they used to say ice cube because they felt frozen. They felt frozen in the stress. So our family, we would just say we're flooding. But knowing that it was a way of communicating. When I have a child tell me I'm flooding, I realize, okay, at that point, it's not personal. They're not trying to get out of the situation. They want to actually engage in the conversation but in a healthy and productive way. And so it is in all of our best interest to stop, pause, separate for at least 30 minutes. But know that sometimes it takes longer.
Mm-hmm.
All of our brains aren't the same. Sometimes we need, the studies have shown that men sometimes need up to 3 hours to drain their brain. So all of us are unique and individuals, and we really need to depend on the Holy Spirit to help us engage in communication that's relational and productive and produces, when I say productive, I mean produces further intimacy and growth in the family and in the individuals in the conversation.
I think the danger that we face when our kids or our spouses are being flooded is that we try to just drive home one last point.
Yes.
And I think the other danger that we struggle with is we're worried that if we separate, we'll never come back together and talk about it. So what do you do in those circumstances?
We usually agree upon a time to reconvene. And then we check in, and if they're still not drained, we do it again. So think of like a cornered raccoon. You know, what does a cornered raccoon do?
A cornered raccoon will just attack. It'll lash out.
Yeah, and that's what we can expect if we keep pushing and pushing and pushing them in an emotional corner. The last strategy or tool that we would like to share with you and how to navigate an emotional trigger, besides flooding, recognizing flooding and what to do, would be another acronym really given by Marcus Warner called VCR. VCR stands for validate, comfort, and repattern or restore. So validate, V. What does validate stand for? It means to validate the emotion. It does not mean to agree with the emotion. Okay.
I still struggle with validation, no
Yes.
matter how many times I've heard it.
When we validate, we first name the emotion. So give it a name. A lot of young people have a hard time naming the emotion. They understand they're feeling something, but they can't even name that. So even helping them name it is helpful. And what I mean by name it is they're describing this. I'll be like, you know, do you feel disgusted with that? Or do you feel shamed by that? You know, helping them, and it gives them an opportunity to correct your understanding of what they're feeling. You're not correcting their feeling. They're correcting your understanding of their feeling, of what they're going. So you name the emotion, you recognize where it originated from. It basically helps express that you understand why they feel the way that they do. Again, you're not agreeing with their feeling. You're not justifying their feelings or anything like that. You're understanding why they feel this way. Even if their perceptions are incorrect, they still need to understand that you understand. Last part of validation is understanding the level of the intensity of the feeling. So oftentimes I'll just say, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 is like, I'm slightly bothered, but 10, it feels consuming to me. What's your number once we've named the emotion? What's your number of intensity for that? And again, it is expressing that you're willing to really understand before we move forward. And when you feel understood, when you feel seen and understood, then I feel like I'm equipped to move through it. When we don't feel understood, it feels that others are trying to move around it and ignore it. So V stands for validate.
When my mom would tell me these things, you know, like, what are you putting in your heart? What are you watching? What are you listening to? It almost sounded accusatory. You know, I tried to keep an open mind, and oftentimes it just felt like I was being called out for things that to me didn't make sense. There was not an evil and, you know, like basis in the things I was listening or watching or doing. Any of the music I had listening to on my iPod, like, I had to get their approval to buy first. So they knew what I was putting in. The stuff on TV, we knew what we weren't allowed to watch, but, you know, if it wasn't somehow Bible related, I felt like it was almost like she was condemning me. Um, Sometimes it felt like maybe she was disappointed in me when she would call those things out, you know. Um, yeah.
C stands for comfort.
Hmm.
So, what's one of the primary ways that we can provide comfort for our child?
I think we can navigate the comfort by helping them to try to see outside of themselves and their own emotions in that circumstance.
Right, see outside of their emotions, but really tap back into who they are
Hmm.
themselves. Um, that the problem doesn't define who they are. The
Absolutely.
problem doesn't define their worth, their acceptance, or their security. The problem is the problem.
Hmm.
And so when we help them see the perspective of these are the different anchors to our souls given by God that we get to hold on to tightly, even in a storm of emotions. That does provide comfort.
Hmm.
Some of those feelings, like it will always be this way.
Hmm.
Sometimes maybe it might be comforting to envelope that conversation, like we said before, to remind them that it always hasn't been this way, and just because it's this way right now doesn't mean it's going to be that way in the future.
Hmm.
So that can be a comforting um, strategy. The last letter in our little acronym of VCR is repattern or recover. So, repattern or recover takes place when validating and comforting becomes really a new pattern in your
Hmm.
family culture. So, this hasn't happened just one time.
Hmm.
We've developed a new pattern. Instead of a sin pattern or habitual reactionary pattern, we are now learning how to return to a place of joy, to return to our identity, to return to a place of safety. So when we validate, then comfort, then that's what enables us to have a total repattern, a lifestyle of recovering from circumstances we cannot control, or
Hmm.
just circumstances that have been painful, or circumstances that we have caused with our own sin.
And I think sometimes as parents, we want to jump straight to the repatterning or the recovering, and the validating and the comforting are important. And the more that we walk through this process, the faster it becomes, right?
Yeah, it really is true. Once they start to experience again God's faithfulness and His anchoring again and again and again, honestly, they just remember it quickly.
Hmm.
They're able to restabilize, but they need our help to do that.
Hmm.
So parents, by 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 validating, comforting, and recovering, we're able to meet our children where they are emotionally. Then we're able to find ways to help them change their perspective. That helps them then move into problem solving. And really, ultimately, call out what is best in them. Again, reminding them of their identity, reminding them of the beautiful ways that they have been created by God, and the purpose that they have here on earth because of that beautiful, unique creation that they have through Christ. So, when we as parents choose to really invest in the way that we communicate, it begins to develop a culture that is centered in the peace that surpasses all understanding, the love that never quits,
Hmm.
right? The grace that is always abundant. All of those things about the Lord that they get to access, and then they develop this resiliency.
Hmm.
The whole family develops this resiliency that we don't have to be shaped by our community or our finances or our friends or our past traumas. We're now shaped by the truth of who God is and who we are because of Him.